Hi everybody, we're going to go ahead and resume. My name is Matt Long and I'm a first year MBA student here at MIT Sloan. I have the pleasure of presenting Patrick Lucy from Disney Research, who's going to be presenting the research paper Win at Home and Draw Away. The presentation will last 20 minutes and will be followed by a 5-minute Q&A section. If you have any questions you'd like to answer, please feel free to come up to the front of the aisle at the end of the presentation. With that said, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Patrick.
Right, so thank you very much. So as Matt said, my name's Patrick Lucy and I'm from Disney Research in Pittsburgh. And today I'm going to talk about some of the work which we've been looking at in soccer and looking at automatic formation detection. So this was the work that we did with an intern of ours, Alina Bielkowski. She's back in Australia now, so she decided to stay there in the warm weather. So on her behalf, I will be presenting this. So before we get into it, so let's just give a very, very crude overview of where we're at with sports analytics. So as you guys know, there's lots of spatio-temporal data becoming available. So it's, over the last 10 years, this data is becoming the mainstream. And especially in the last couple of years, there's lots of really, really good analysis happening. But that basically it's mostly down at the individual level. So the previous paper was a really good example of that. So they were analysing the decisions of each player in different situations. So shot charts is another way, deconstructing the rebound. We had a paper here last year looking at predicting shots in tennis. But the big question is, in terms of team analytics, there's really not a lot of work out there. And so what I mean by team analytics, soccer's a prime example. What we're interested in is the formation and how they move over time. And also in basketball, we're interested in the system of play. So these very high-level strategic things that we're interested in. Now, anyone who's played around with this data knows this is very, very difficult. So the big reasons are, it's continuous and low scoring, especially in the case of soccer. It's time varying, so comparing different lengths of time of play is very, very difficult. Annotating tactics is very subjective, so just say, I annotated some phase of play and someone else did, the reliability is going to be really low. So if the reliability is low, it basically means these stats are meaningless. Okay? And also it's dynamic and complex, so it's a multi-agent environment. So doing these comparisons is really, really problematic. So with things like soccer, this is essentially what we get. So we get the box score. And the box score in terms of storytelling really doesn't give a good indication of what's happening. When actually what we really want is the formation and how the formation is played over time. And recently there's a lot of interest in this. So you have experts actually annotating these things. They go through a match and they'll pick out the key points and they'll say which formation they played and how it changed and how it basically coincided with one team dominating the other team. But again, this is very subjective. We have all this data now. We should be able to come up with a quantifiable solution. So that's the big thesis behind this work. So with all this player tracking data, let's do a better job of quantifying and analysing team behaviour. But again, it's very, very complex. So that last point I have there, dynamic and complex environment. So we have all these players. So once we go beyond the individual, we have the problem of permutation. So I'm going to explain this in the next couple of examples. So let's step back and let's think about how do we compare two players? Or to a computer, how do we get this XY data and do a comparison? So we have play one there. So just say we have play one. I've taken an example of Liverpool here and just say we have all the players and then we have the ball. Okay? So the big question is, how can we get a computer to understand that? So for people who are used to playing with Excel, basically, how do we get those player positions and how do we get those positions into a column? Okay? So essentially, what you can do is you get all the player positions and you just come up with some ordering. So you can just scan the players, based on the left back and just go through. And once you have that ordering, that's maintained over time. And so just say we're interested in one particular player. Suarez is on the right, he crosses it to Raheem Sterling on the left. This representation can basically incorporate all of that behaviour. So just say we have the second play, and it's exactly the same. So 10 minutes later, it's exactly the same thing that happens. We have that same representation, so how do we compare it? Essentially, we just do a difference, right? So we have the two feature vectors, and then we just compare the two. And because we're dealing with XY data, we can just find the difference of the absolute position. So if it's exactly the same, and we just look at the feature correspondences, they should be 0. So if it's exactly the same, the distance should be 0. And that's a way to compare a play, okay? But then we have an issue. So just say Suarez and Sterling switch positions, okay? What happens then? So we have in our feature representation, these two guys swap. In terms of distances, instead of having 0, it's actually 100. So they switch the side of the field, that's actually 100 meters, okay? And when we find the mean across that, that coincides with essentially just under 20 meters. So we can have an error ellipse around each of these players, that's 20 meters. So the problem of roll swaps and permutation is essentially incorporating noise into our signal. So that's why it's so difficult. And it only gets, so we have 10 players, so let's disregard the poor old goalkeeper. We have 10 players. The number of permutations is 10 factorial. 3.5 million types of permutations just for that snapshot. So doing comparisons, it's just random, okay? That's why this is very, very difficult. But, we have the other example. So just say Brendan Rodgers is there on the sideline. He says, Joe Allen, warm up, but he plays in the centre midfield. So he says, right, Jordan Henderson, you go off to the right. Joe Allen, you slot in the middle. Into our feature representation, this includes more noise. Okay, so hopefully you're getting the point. So how can we get around this? So the main problem here is permutation. How can we guard against this problem of permutation? Well, we have a language. So guys used to soccer or in basketball, any sport, we have a language. So the last question in the previous talk asked about role. Okay, that's basically the key to solving this problem. So instead of worrying about the identity of the player, we don't really care about the identity of the player. We care about which position they are and what they're doing. So which position they are relative to the other players. And once we have that representation, we can do comparisons. So we have that first play and the second play. So just say they swap. If we use a role representation, we basically guard against that problem and then we compare like to like, okay? That's the idea. So once we do that, we overcome this nasty problem of permutation and then we can do like comparisons, okay? And, this allows for large-scale analysis. So we've got rid of that bottleneck. It allows for large-scale analysis. So instead of just analysing Liverpool, we can compare the behemoth of world football, Australia. So just say we have Tommy Orr on the right, he crosses to Tim Cahill. We can do that comparison. So if they're exactly the same thing, the error is going to be 0. And we can say, hey, that's exactly the same play. So that's the key idea. So the idea behind this paper is how can we find this role representation, and we define the role representation or a formation as a set of roles. So given all this tracking data, how can we do that? So to do this work, we've been working with Prozone, so they've been very good partners in this work. So essentially they gave us a whole season of a recent league. Unfortunately, we can't disclose the identity of the league or the teams, but it is of a top tier league. So the goal behind this work is from the tracking data, let's automatically find these formations. But as we said before, players interchange positions a lot, okay? So on the bottom left there, we have the player tracks of all these players, they're moving around. And then if we just take the mean across the half, we see there's all this overlap. Essentially what we want to do is disentangle this, okay? Because players have this formation, they may change roles during the match, we just basically want to disentangle that. And not only in terms of analysis, this is really useful, but this basically allows us to do other things like retrieval. We're looking at doing automatic broadcasting. This is a bottleneck which allows us to do all these cool applications. So for the rest of the talk, I'm just going to talk about the analysis that we did on home versus away, and also some work that we've been doing with retrieval. Okay, so how do we actually do it from the data? So how do we find these roles from data? Well, essentially we can do it in 6 steps, okay? So we need to come up with an initial ordering. So remember back in the example, we just come up with some canonical ordering. And then from that, we want to find the mean, okay? So that's our initial estimation of the formation. And from that, we get a good approximation. So it's not the final formation, but we can see something going on there. So we can see the back four, and we can see the midfielders all muddled up, but that's a pretty good estimation. So this is a prime candidate to use the expectation maximization algorithm. So we have the parameters, and we have a good initialization, we can just iterate on that, and then we can solve for this model. So once we have that initial model, we can update each role. So we use something called the Hungarian algorithm to assign each detection a new role, and then we just improve that over time until we get to some convergence. And these formations pop out quite nicely. So you see very, very slowly they're disentangling it. So I have some further examples here. I'll just get through this. So I have another example here. So you can see it's nicely disentangling these player positions, and we get these nice formations popping out. Okay. So most of the work's done on the first couple of iterations, but the key point is we can find these set of roles which can define the formation. Okay, so here's a visualization of what we get out of it. So you can see with the player identity, so just tracking the player identity, we can see there's all this confusion, but once we use our role representation, we get this nice formation, moving up and down the pitch, which allows us to do these comparisons. And also in terms of match summarization, we can see how the game evolves over time. So I really like this example because we can see where the play is happening over time and how they're interacting. Okay, so I think this is another powerful attribute of our technique. But in terms of actually discovering the types of formations, so in the league that we analysed, we did some clustering just to see the main types of formations that were used. So we can see the two main formations were the 4-2-3-1. So if anyone follows soccer, that's quite a popular formation being played these days. Also the 4-4-2. In the league that we analysed, a team played with a back three, and then we had some other formations. So we had the 4-1-4-1, and then the 4-4-2 in a diamond type of shape. So it kind of passed the gut check there, just to see these things were happening. But in terms of analysis, what can we do? So we analyse a particular case study here, and I'm sure in the community here people are familiar with this book, Scorecasting. So one of the really, really good sections of the book is analysing home advantage. And essentially they went through all the professional sports and they found that the home advantage exists in all professional sports. So essentially their thesis was that home advantage was mostly due to referee bias. So at home the referees tend to give the home teams the call in the big moments. And it's especially prevalent in soccer, which makes sense. Soccer's very low scoring, and in the big moments, so if you get a penalty or a free kick just outside the box, these things can have a big bearing on the outcome of the match. So, but we didn't want to get too down on the referees. We wanted to see if there's some strategic element behind that as well. So, so what we did, again, we used a whole season of Prozone data, so we had home and away. So if people aren't familiar with Prozone data, so they capture the XY position of every player at 10 frames per second, and also they have the ball event data as well. So we know when an event happened, and also the time and the location of that event. And so what we actually found is that in the season that we analysed, the home advantage did exist. So for every home game, the home team could expect 1.6 points per game. So you get 3 for a win, 1 for a draw, 0 for a loss. And the away team only can expect 1.1 point per game. And this is significant, okay? But what's interesting, so you get more shots and more goals at home. So there's significant difference in the number of shots and goals you get at home. But the passing, the number of passes and the success of passes is not different, okay? And the shooting accuracy is not different. So what can explain this? So we looked at the possession. And before we get to that, so there's an adage, so the name of the paper is win at home and draw away. So essentially there's a common held belief in soccer that you should so to win the league, you have to win your home games and draw your away. Because there's, it's commonly held belief that there is this home advantage. So we have Alex Ferguson there, saying, you have to do this to win the championship. And what explains it is the forward bias. So our home teams, every team, had a lot more possession, significantly more possession in the forward third, which makes sense. If you have more possession in the forward third, you have more shots, you have more goals, then you're more likely to win. The shooting proficiency is exactly the same. The passes are exactly the same. It's just where you're having that possession, okay? And that's significant for every team. So teams here are attacking left to right, And so you can see in the forward third, that part of the field is a lot more red, okay? And so in terms of possession, so home teams had 14.1% possession in that forward third, away only 11.8%. And that's very, very significant, okay? So in terms of formation analysis, what does this mean? So we wanted to see, well, are managers actually picking a different formation to play? Are they playing more conservatively? Or is it just the way the team is executing that formation? So now that we have a method which can pick up on these formation, it allows us to do this analysis. Okay, so let's look at it. So to start with, let's just focus on one team. So this team A, and let's look at the formation they played at home across one season. So so their home performances are in red, so you can see they're pretty similar. In a way, pretty much the same thing, okay? But are they different? So let's plot them one on top of each other. They're pretty rigid, right? Very rigid. And actually what we found, most teams basically played the same formation across the whole season. There's some slight variance, so team B there, you can see there's some scatter of the positions, and also in team T, so they dabbled with the back three. And then the other confusion tends to be just around the forward, around the strikers. So with the strikers, they either fluctuate between two strikers or a striker in an attacking midfield. So basically, we can see that teams are quite rigid in the formation that they play. Now let's look at, so that formation analysis basically looked at the teams normalised, so centroid normalised. Let's look at them unnormalised. So we can see this kind of messy plot here. But if we look at the centroid of these formations, we can actually see there's a bit of a discrepancy here. Okay, so what we actually found is that home teams play their formations significantly further up the pitch. Okay, and that happened for every team. Every team, when they had possession, they played further up the pitch. In defence, they did the same thing. Okay, and in terms of distance ran, this was really interesting. Home teams actually ran less. It's because they played further up the pitch, they actually ran less. So when you're defending deeper, it actually means you have more space to carry. So that's another interesting finding here. So it's not actually the formations which are different, it's just the way that teams are executing the formation. So just to summarise the home advantage, so as we just showed, that there's a big discrepancy in the outcomes between home and away performances in soccer. Also, there's more shots, there's more goals, there's the same passing and shooting proficiency. What we found is that there's a heavy possession bias in the forward third. And also, teams tend to play the same formation, but it's just the way they executed that formation is different. Which begs the question, can we use this analysis for anything other than soccer? Well, we've been doing some work with Stat Sports View to keep that theme of basketball here. You know, we can actually do this as well. Okay, so we have a poster which we'll be presenting tomorrow. So we analysed all the three-point shots in the NBA last year. And we actually wanted to look at the team behaviour. What we actually found is that the most significant factor of a team getting an open shot was how far the defence moved and the number of roll swaps. Okay, so that was the most predictive feature. So we're actually able to measure defence, team defence, which we think is, quite a powerful thing. And it was significant for all 13 teams. So if you're interested in that, come see our poster tomorrow. But what we're actually most interested in, and I think this is a really, really nice idea. So because we have these role correspondences, we can actually do retrieval. So people are just focusing on just doing analysis. But there's so much we can do with this data. There is so much we can do with this data. So we have these role correspondences, and actually we can do these comparisons, which means that given a play, let's find all the plays which are similar. So currently in retrieval in sports analytics is that people just use keywords. So they have annotators, you have Synergy Sports, you have annotators annotating all these plays. But if we find a play of interest, let's not go rifle through all the other video, let's just use the tracking data. Okay? Get the onset and offset of the tracking data, and let's find all the plays like that. So we have an example of our retrieval system here. So that's the input of interest. So that was a game, Golden State Warriors versus Houston. Using our retrieval system, using our role representation, we can actually retrieve all similar plays. So as my colleague Yisong says, instead of spending 40 hours of retrieving or cutting tape, you can do this in a second. So it's just utilising the data better. Okay, so just take home points here, just to summarise. So team behaviours are difficult to measure due to the problems of permutations. We have a method to resolve that permutation problem. So we use this to analyse team behaviours, so we analyse home advantage, but also we can use other tasks. And probably the most exciting application on that we're working on is actually doing an automatic sports broadcast. Okay, that's the big goal. If we can have real-time tracking, we can actually do real-time broadcast. I think that's the most powerful thing. So my colleague Peter Carr, he'll be presenting this at EOS Talk tomorrow. So if you're interested, it's a really, really good presentation, so I strongly suggest you go see that. So that basically sums it up, so thanks for listening. Cheers.
All right, we have a few minutes for questions. Please come to the front if you have any.
Hey, I really enjoyed the analysis, conclusions, whatnot. From a practical perspective, talking about the home field advantage or home team advantage, do you think this is something that can actually be taken into play where you just tell teams completely ignore the style of play, ignore where you are and play the same either way? Like, is there anything that you think would prevent that from actually being the case?
So I think so. So the first thing, I think if you present the data to the managers and just say, well, this is what's happening, take away that conservatism. You only score when you have shots, okay? That's the only way you're going to win. So stop sitting back, just press forward more. So I think that's the first thing, because it's commonly held belief. So people just expect to sit back. And it's hard to prove causation. So it could be that the home team are pressing forward, then the the away team naturally backs off. We can't prove that, but the analysis that we've done basically could be used just to suggest to managers, hey, this is what's going on. Maybe try to educate your team to be more aggressive away from home.
Hey, on the issue of causation, did you see the same results if you had a visiting team that won or a home team that lost? Did you still see the same type of field?
So this is very cool. So we did it across the whole season. So to get enough data to do that type of, to prove significance, we had to look at the whole data. But for every team, they did win more games and they did draw more games away. So for every team, so if you look through the league, every team won significantly more games at home compared to away.
If being at home is what's causing this shift forward or the advantage, then if a visitor team won and they had a more forward presence.
Yes, so we didn't condition on that. That's a very good point. We didn't condition on those scenarios. Yes.
So what's the relationship, or what did you find with the traditional thing with the scorecasting of, you know, home team getting more calls? So getting calls in relationship to your position on the field, if that's part of, obviously it's part of it, but
yeah. So what we found that also a significant factor was home teams getting more penalties. So more penalties and more free kicks in that area. Yeah. So
but the amount of just penalties being called just affects how much do you find that affects where they are spatially on the field?
So to get those calls, you have to be in that position. Okay, you have to be in that forward third to get that position. If you're not there, you're not going to get those calls. Okay, so that could reinforce what they're actually finding. Yeah.
Did you do any work on how formations change over the course of a game? Like
So this is what we're looking at. So for this analysis, we just did an estimation on that entire half, but a good window is actually 5 minutes because we know that formations fluctuate during a game. Yeah. So for this analysis, we've just been analysing the entire half, but more recently we've been looking at shorter windows.
Okay, so looking at how, say, a team might change its formation or change its strategy
Yes.
at different periods of the match.
Yeah. So also offensively, what shape do they have? Defensively, what shape do they have? Because they're very important factors as well. Yeah.
Right. I think we have time for one more question.
I know you can't say the country that you did the study in, but do you think different cultural styles of play, I don't know, total football compared to long ball, would have more of an effect on, your findings or the home?
Absolutely. So what they found in scorecasting, that existed in every professional league in soccer.
Oh.
So, we haven't got the data of every league, unfortunately, so we haven't been able to find that. But I would suggest that, I would think that something similar would happen. Yeah.
All right, please join me in thanking Patrick.